My boss humiliated me in front of 300 people during our quarterly all-hands meeting. He said I needed to take time off to work on my attitude. I didn't argue. I just closed my laptop and walked out. What David didn't know was that my brother had been recording everything from the back of the room, and my attorney was already filing the complaint. I smiled as I drove away from Technova's campus. His cruelty had ended. This was his last mistake. I pressed record on my phone and slipped it into my blazer pocket as I walked into conference room A. The entire engineering department was already there, plus sales, marketing, and half of corporate. David had insisted this be an all-hands meeting, mandatory attendance. He wanted an audience. The presentation on the screen showed my project, the AI algorithm I'd spent 18 months developing. Except David's name was listed as the primary architect. Mine appeared in tiny font at the bottom under additional contributors. I took my seat in the third row, keeping my expression neutral. Across the aisle, my friend Rachel wouldn't meet my eyes. That told me everything I needed to know about her role in this. David stood at the front, all charisma and perfectly tailored suit, clicking through slides that detailed my work as if he'd created it himself. But then he paused on a slide I'd never seen before. Unfortunately, he said, his voice carrying that practiced tone of regret, we've had some concerns about team dynamics. Sarah, could you stand up please? Every head in the room turned toward me. I stood slowly, my phone still recording in my pocket. Sarah's been with us for 6 years, David continued, and while we appreciate her technical contributions, we've received feedback that she's not quite a culture fit. Too intense, too emotional, not collaborative enough. My throat tightened, but I kept my face blank. In the back row, I could see Kevin, my brother, holding up his phone. Recording, just like we'd planned. I've asked Sarah to take some unpaid leave, David said, to really think about whether Technova is the right place for her. Sometimes people need space to work on themselves, to address their attitude issues. 300 people staring at me. Some looked uncomfortable. Most looked away. A few, like Rachel, looked relieved that it wasn't them. Do you have anything to say, Sarah? David asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. I thought about the 18 months of documentation sitting in my attorney's office. The screenshots of every Slack message David had edited after sending. The timestamps showing when he'd accessed my code repository at 2 in the morning. The emails from 4 other women engineers he'd pushed out the same way. The financial records showing the sales numbers he'd fabricated to inflate the company's pre-IPO valuation. No, I said simply. I think you've said enough. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, downloaded the meeting recording from the company server using the admin access I still had for another 6 hours, and drove to my attorney's office. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here with me today. If you believe that no one deserves to be humiliated and silenced for speaking truth, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps these important stories reach those who need them most. 6 months ago, I would have apologized. 6 months ago, I still believed that working harder, staying quieter, making myself smaller would be enough. That was before I discovered David wasn't just stealing credit from my work. He was stealing from everyone. The moment I'd started asking questions about why my code appeared in his patent application, he'd turned vicious. The public humiliation was his escalation, but it was also his mistake. Lisa Chen, my attorney, was already in her office when I arrived. She'd been my roommate at MIT, had gone on to specialize in employment law, and had seen enough tech industry abuse to write a textbook on it. Did you get it? She asked, gesturing to my phone. Every word. I forwarded her the audio file, and Kevin got video from the back. She plugged a flash drive into her computer and pulled up a folder labeled Morrison, David, Evidence. It was massive. 18 months of work. The labor board complaint goes in tomorrow morning, Lisa said. I've also drafted a cease and desist regarding the patent application. But Sarah, you need to understand what we're up against. David's been with Technova since the series of funding. The CEO plays golf with him. HR Director Mike Roberts has been covering for him for years. I know. I opened my laptop and pulled up my own files. That's why I didn't just document David. I showed her the spreadsheet. Names, dates, patterns. David had done this to 4 other women in the past 3 years. Jennifer Park, forced out after he took credit for her machine learning model. Amy Rodriguez, pushed to resign after he called her difficult in front of clients. Keiko Tanaka, whose entire project was reassigned to David's team the week before her performance review. And Priya Sharma, who'd filed an internal complaint and been laid off 2 weeks later during a restructuring. I found them all, I said. I reached out. They're willing to talk. Lisa leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. You've been busy. David taught me something important, I replied. He taught me that documentation beats gaslighting every single time. The next morning, I woke up to 73 missed calls. David's number flashing over and over. Then Mike from HR. Then David's assistant. Then numbers I didn't recognize. I made coffee and watched the calls pile up while Lisa's complaint hit Technova's legal department. The labor board didn't mess around with mandatory all-hands humiliation and forced unpaid leave. Especially when you had video evidence and 300 witnesses. Around 10, Rachel finally called. I almost didn't answer, but I wanted to hear what she'd say. Sarah, oh my God, are you okay? Her voice was uncertain, nervous. I'm fine, Rachel. How are you? There are lawyers everywhere. The CEO just called an emergency meeting. David's freaking out. He asked me to call you, to see if you'd be willing to talk things out privately. David never wanted to talk things out. He wanted to intimidate, to make deals that benefited him, to control the narrative. Tell David I'll see him in court. I hung up and blocked her number. One more betrayal documented, one more person who'd chosen self-preservation over doing the right thing. Kevin arrived at my apartment an hour later with his laptop and a bag of evidence we'd stored at his office. My brother had started his private investigation business specifically because of cases like this. He'd watched too many friends get pushed out of tech jobs, seen too many patterns go unaddressed. I pulled the server logs, he said, spreading printouts across my dining table. David accessed your repository 347 times in the past 18 months. Almost always between midnight and 3 a.m. And look at this. He showed me the commit history. Every major breakthrough in my algorithm, David had accessed my code within hours. Then presented it in meetings the next day, as his own idea. He's been doing this the entire time, Kevin said. Not just lately. From the beginning. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but the message made my blood run cold. I have information about David Morrison. Can we meet? Former Technova employee. Lisa said to document everything, so I called her and put the phone on speaker when I responded. Turns out, the former employee was Carlos Martinez, David's previous assistant. He'd quit 6 months ago, burned out and disgusted by what he'd witnessed. We met him at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. Carlos looked nervous, kept checking over his shoulder like David might appear at any moment. I kept copies, he said, sliding a flash drive across the table. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't just let him keep doing this. He made me forge client contracts. Fake sales numbers for the board meetings. Made up revenue projections to inflate the company valuation before the IPO. Kevin's eyes widened. That's securities fraud. I know. Carlos's hands were shaking. I tried to tell Mike in HR. He told me to keep quiet or I'd never work in tech again. So I quit. But I couldn't delete the files. I kept thinking someday someone would be brave enough to stop him. The flash drive contained 2 years of fabricated sales reports, falsified contracts with clients who'd never actually signed, and emails showing David had set up shadow accounts to hide the discrepancies. If the SEC found out, Technova's IPO would collapse. Hundreds of employees would lose their stock options. Investors would lose millions. And David had been setting me up to take the fall. There's more, Carlos said quietly. About 3 months ago, David started moving documentation around. Making it look like certain decisions came from your team, Sarah. If this all blows up, you're the one with your name on the financial projections he falsified. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about credit for my code. David had been building a paper trail to frame me for his crimes. That afternoon, Kevin and I drove to the offices of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The agent who met with us, Thomas Park, specialized in pre-IPO fraud. He listened to our story with an expression that never changed, but his eyes got harder with each piece of evidence. This is substantial, he said finally. We've actually been looking at Technova for about 8 weeks now. Anonymous tip came in about irregularities in their financials. Chen, would you be willing to cooperate fully with our investigation? Absolutely. Good. Because David Morrison is about to have a very bad day. The Technova offices were chaos when I arrived the next morning. Not to clean out my desk, I'd already done that remotely. I came because Lisa said I needed to see this, needed to witness the moment everything fell apart. Federal agents in windbreakers with SEC stamped on the back were carrying boxes out of David's office. The CEO, Richard Blackwell, stood in the lobby looking shell-shocked. Mike from HR was on the phone, his face pale. I stood by the elevators, just watching. David appeared from the stairwell, probably trying to avoid the main floor. He saw me and froze. You did this, he said, walking toward me. You vindictive. Mr. Morrison. An SEC agent stepped between us. We need you to come with us. You're wanted for questioning regarding securities fraud, falsification of corporate records, and wire fraud. The look on David's face was worth every moment of fear, every sleepless night wondering if I was doing the right thing. He'd spent years convinced he was untouchable. He'd gotten away with it for so long, pushing women out, stealing their work, manipulating numbers, always believing he was smarter than everyone else. He'd never expected the emotional engineer to have 18 months of documentation. That evening, the story broke. Seattle Times headline. Technova VP, arrested for securities fraud, workplace abuse allegations surface. By morning, it was national news. Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, even CNN picked it up. My phone exploded with messages. Some supportive, many angry, a few threatening. David's friends and colleagues couldn't believe their golden boy could be guilty. His mother, Patricia, released a statement calling me a disgruntled employee seeking attention. But the evidence didn't care about their opinions. Lisa filed the formal discrimination complaint the day after David's arrest. Technova's lawyers called within hours, wanting to settle. Lisa laughed and hung up. We're not settling, she said. We're going to trial. We're going to make this public. Because you're not his only victim, and the next woman deserves better. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks later. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but the judge, the Honorable Patricia Kim, had a reputation for taking workplace discrimination cases seriously. David sat at the defense table in a suit that no longer fit his personality. Without his usual stage and audience, he looked ordinary. Small. Lisa presented our evidence methodically. The video of the all-hands humiliation. The server logs showing David's theft of my code. Testimony from Jennifer, Amy, Keiko, and Priya about their experiences. Carlos's documentation of the financial fraud. But the most damaging testimony came from Rachel. My former friend walked to the witness stand looking like she hadn't slept in days. She'd been granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation, and she was about to bury David completely. How long were you aware of David Morrison's actions? The prosecutor asked. 2 years, Rachel said quietly. He told me if I helped him, he'd promote me to senior engineer. He said Sarah was too aggressive, that she made people uncomfortable. He needed someone to report on her, to document any time she seemed difficult or emotional. And did you do that? Yes. I'm ashamed to say I did. I sent him screenshots of Slack conversations, told him about project meetings, even told him when Sarah was working on breakthroughs so he could access her code that night and present it as his own the next day. I watched David's face go white. His attorney was frantically scribbling notes, but there was no defending against this. Why did you finally come forward? The prosecutor asked. Because I realized I'd become the kind of person I'd always despised. David used me just like he used everyone else. And when he thought the investigation was closing in, he tried to frame me too. Set up documents, making it look like I'd helped with the financial fraud. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of the court reporter's fingers on the keyboard. Judge Kim reviewed the evidence with an expression that reminded me of my grandmother when she was disappointed in someone. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Morrison, I'm finding probable cause for the criminal charges to proceed to trial. Furthermore, I'm issuing a preliminary injunction. You are prohibited from contacting any Technova employees, from accessing any company's systems, and from attempting to patent or profit from any code or algorithms developed by Ms. Chen or any other plaintiff. David stood, his composure completely shattered. Your Honor, this is a coordinated attack. She planned this whole thing, she. "Mr. Morrison, you humiliated an employee in front of hundreds of people, forced her into unpaid leave, and stole her intellectual property. The fact that she documented your actions doesn't make you the victim. It makes her smart. Sit down." As we left the courthouse, Lisa's phone started ringing. 3 more women from other Seattle tech companies wanted to talk. They'd seen the news coverage and recognized the same pattern in their own experiences. "This is bigger than just David," Lisa said. "He's not an outlier, he's part of a system." The criminal trial started 6 months later. The prosecution laid out the case over 3 weeks. Securities fraud, 15 counts. Theft of intellectual property, 8 counts. Workplace discrimination, 6 counts. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing $8 million in fabricated sales. Testimony from clients who'd never signed the contracts David presented to investors. Expert analysis of my algorithm proving David couldn't have written it, he didn't even understand the math behind it. On day 17, David made the catastrophic decision to take the stand. His attorney clearly didn't want him to, kept trying to whisper objections, but David insisted. He still believed he could talk his way out of this. For 2 hours, he tried to spin a narrative where he was the visionary and I was the problem employee. He claimed I'd approved his use of my code. He insisted the sales numbers were projections, not fraud. He portrayed himself as a victim of a vindictive woman who couldn't handle criticism. Then the prosecutor began cross-examination. When confronted with the video of the all-hands meeting, David claimed it was taken out of context. When shown the server logs, he said he was just reviewing the team's work. When presented with Carlos's documentation of the fraud, he actually said, "That's just how business works." The jury looked appalled. They deliberated for 5 hours. As the 4 women stood to read the verdict, I held Kevin's hand on one side and Lisa's on the other. On count 1, securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, theft of intellectual property, we find the defendant guilty. By the time they reached count 29, David had put his head in his hands. Guilty on all charges. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Kim looked down at David with the same disappointment she'd shown at the preliminary hearing. "Mr. Morrison, you didn't just steal code or fabricate numbers. You created a hostile environment that pushed talented engineers out of an entire industry. You betrayed the trust of investors, employees, and colleagues. You showed no remorse and took no responsibility. This court sentences you to 84 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release. You are also ordered to pay $3.2 million in restitution to Technova's investors and $1.5 million to the plaintiffs in the civil case. 7 years. David would spend 7 years in prison. As they led him away, he turned back to me one last time. "This isn't over," he mouthed. I stood up so the court microphones would catch my words. "You're right. The civil trials for your other victims start next month." The SEC whistleblower reward came through 8 weeks after David's sentencing. $900,000 for providing information that prevented investor fraud. Combined with my share of the civil settlement and the restoration of my patent rights, I suddenly had the resources to do something meaningful. Kevin found the building, a renovated warehouse in Seattle's South Lake Union that had previously housed a startup accelerator. Open floor plan, private offices for consultations, a server room we could secure properly, and most importantly, multiple exits. We signed the lease on a Monday. By Friday, Code with Confidence had its home. "We need proper cybersecurity," Kevin said, walking through the space with his tablet. "Not just for our systems, but to teach people how to protect their own documentation. Encrypted email, secure cloud storage. Tools that actually help instead of surveilling." Dr. Patel, the therapist who'd helped me document the emotional abuse, brought in 3 colleagues who wanted to volunteer their time. "This kind of systematic gaslighting does real psychological damage," she said. "We need to be ready to support people through the entire process." Lisa took a 6-month sabbatical from her practice to help establish our legal aid program. "The big firms won't take these cases because they're afraid of alienating tech companies," she explained, spreading incorporation documents across a table. "We need to create a pipeline for pro bono representation." Within a month, we had our first client. Maya, a data scientist whose manager had been stealing her research and publishing it under his own name. She'd been too afraid to speak up, worried she'd be blacklisted from the industry. Kevin did the digital forensics, tracking when her manager accessed her files. Lisa filed the complaint. Dr. Patel helped Maya work through the trauma of betrayal. I sat with her while she cried, remembering my own tears in my apartment the night of the all-hands meeting. Rachel reached out 6 months after the trial. She'd quit tech entirely, was working at a nonprofit, and had been in intensive therapy. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said when we met for coffee. "I was a coward and I hurt you because I was too afraid to stand up. I thought about all the ways people fail each other, all the small betrayals that add up to something catastrophic. I can't forget what you did," I told her honestly. "But I understand why you did it. And if you really want to make amends, there's work to be done. We need people who understand how this happens, who can help others recognize when they're being used." Rachel started as a volunteer, answering our hotline and helping people document workplace abuse. She was brutally honest about her own choices, took responsibility while also explaining the gradual manipulation that made those choices seem reasonable at the time. "He made me feel special," she told a support group one evening. "Like I was smarter than other women, more of a team player." By the time I realized I was just another tool in his manipulation, I was in too deep to see the exit. 1 year after David's sentencing, a letter arrived at the foundation. His handwriting was still sharp, even on prison stationery. 3 pages of complaints about his treatment, claims that his conviction was a miscarriage of justice, insistence that he was the real victim. The final line read, "I hope you've learned your lesson." I had it professionally framed and hung it in my office right next to my restored patent certificate and my MIT degree. When clients asked about it, I told them the truth. Yes, I had learned my lesson. I'd learned that when someone shows you through their cruelty who they really are, believe them. I'd learned that patience and documentation could overcome years of systematic abuse. Most importantly, I'd learned that the best response to someone trying to erase you is to become unforgettable, then use that strength to lift others. The Seattle tech community slowly started to change. Our foundation helped 37 engineers in the first year, some needing just legal advice, others requiring complete exit strategies. Each one had arrived convinced they were trapped, that their situation was hopeless. David's former boss, Technova CEO Richard Blackwell, quietly resigned 6 months after the trial. The board brought in a new CEO, a woman named Jennifer Zhou who'd spent 20 years fighting for equity in tech. One of her first acts was implementing new policies on intellectual property protection and workplace harassment. "Your case changed everything," she told me when we met. The board realized they couldn't ignore these patterns anymore. "We're implementing quarterly audits of code authorship, anonymous reporting systems, and mandatory bias training. It's not enough, but it's a start." The industry press started calling me for interviews. I said yes to every single one, not because I wanted attention, but because silence had protected people like David for too long. "How did you have the courage to come forward?" a reporter from Wired asked. "It wasn't courage," I said. "It was math. I ran the calculations. The odds of winning went up with every piece of evidence I collected. By month 18, the probability of justice was higher than the probability of failure. So I took the shot. 18 months after that humiliating all-hands meeting, I stood in our foundation office looking at a wall covered in thank you notes. Names I recognized and names I'd never met, all connected by similar stories of theft, gaslighting, and systematic abuse in the industry we'd all loved. My algorithm, the one David had tried to steal, had been properly patented under my name. 3 companies had licensed it. I'd used that money to fund scholarships for women studying computer science, specifically targeting those from backgrounds that traditionally got pushed out of tech. The rain was falling outside, typical Seattle weather, drumming against the warehouse windows. I thought about that day in conference room A, standing in front of 300 people while David tried to break me. He thought he was teaching me about power and control, about knowing my place. Instead, he taught me that cruelty creates its own destruction, that every action has consequences, and that sometimes the person you humiliate in front of hundreds has already seen you coming and prepared accordingly. Through Code with Confidence, his act of calculated cruelty had become the catalyst for protecting people he never believed deserved protecting. The ultimate lesson, the one David never saw coming, wasn't about submission or silence or accepting your place. It was about transformation. He tried to erase me from the code. Instead, I became the blueprint for change. If this story of calculated justice resonated with you, let me know in the comments. My favorite part was realizing that every time David accessed my code at 2 in the morning, he was actually building the evidence trail that would destroy him. What was your favorite moment? Drop it below. And if you know someone in tech who needs to hear this, share this story. Sometimes people need to know they're not alone, and that documentation really does beat gaslighting every single time.